Every family that we've ever worked with has a DDO. It's a designated difficult one. I've never, ever worked with a family where there's not a DDO. They had the penthouse of that office building as their home. It was a compound of buildings, something like 48 bedrooms. They were really rich people, and they drove Toyota Camrys. I got a call last week from a guy by the name of Rick Scott, who's now our senator, who was then the head of Hospital Corporation of America. And Rick Scott just offered us $150 million to buy this hospital. I'm fascinated by the fact that they would offer us $150 million for it because we're only making $6 or $8 million a year. This coming June, we will be celebrating our 56th wedding anniversary. People ask me, they say, "What's your secret, Mike, to this long marriage that you've had?" And I said, "Oh, that's simple." I said, "I can tell you exactly what my secret is."
Welcome to another episode of Blueprints Podcast. Today, I am joined by another one of my clients, Mr. Mike Cummings, coming all the way from Orlando. Welcome.
Hi, Dave.
Mr. Mike.
Good to see you.
Likewise. It's been a couple of months since I've seen you.
It has been.
You were officially the first recording I ever did.
Wow.
But because I was such a novice, that unfortunately got all messed up and we were never able to publish it. So thank you again for coming back on and taking the time to, do this for me.
Very glad to do it.
All right, perfect. So today we're going to chat a little bit about, the early Mike, and how that transitioned into your entrepreneurship journey, family, grandkids, kids, all that good stuff.
Sounds good. Sounds great.
Perfect. All right, let's jump right into it. So take us back to when Mike was a young Mike.
Okay.
Where were you born? What was your family life like?
Well, first I was born at a very young age, and I was born in a little town in southern Illinois that sits directly on the Ohio River across from Paducah, Kentucky. And that little town is the only town in the United States that is named Metropolis. And in Metropolis, Illinois, if you go down to the local courthouse, there is a 30-foot tall statue of Superman, and on the statue it says "Truth, Justice, and the American Way." And so a lot of people will drive through Metropolis in order to have their picture taken in front of that statue of Superman. Metropolis is a small community, probably 6,000 or 7,000 people. It was the first community on the Ohio River to have a riverboat gambling casino, and so when the casino came to town, it was really a big deal. And because the casino sat right down on the river, Merv Griffin was part of the organization that brought it there, and it was quite a big deal. It was a very interesting little community. But while I was born there, at age 5, my father, who worked in his father's wholesale food business, my father decided that he wanted to enter the ministry as a pastor in the Methodist Church. And so we moved from Metropolis to a little town called Marissa, Illinois, and I started school there in this little country town. Dad was going to college at the time. After he had finished his college, he was going to go to seminary. So our family that lived in this little tiny town moved to a place that you probably heard of. It's called New York City.
A little familiar.
Yeah. And so it was a culture shock for me. I mean, absolutely culture shock. I went from being in this little bitty tiny grade school to go to PS 15, Public School 15 in New York City on Staten Island.
So how did you adjust to that? Because that's a big adjustment.
Yeah, it was an incredible adjustment. I mean, it was strange, and I think that my experience in New York just kind of opened up seeing people that were different than me, because in the little town we were in, just about everybody was white and Christian. Yeah. And now suddenly I was in a very interesting ethnic mix of people, because I used to joke and say when I was in New York, I was known as the Gentile. And I don't think it was really that bad, but there were some Jewish kids in my class, and there were some Latins in my class, and it was a very interesting ethnic mix that I was in on Staten Island. And so we were there, like I say, just for a couple of years. And when we left there, we moved to Waukegan, Illinois, which is right on Lake Michigan, halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee, and just north of the Great Lakes Naval Training Center, which is north of Chicago. And so we were in Waukegan through seventh grade. So I was in New York through like third and fourth grade. Then fifth, sixth, and seventh grade, I was in Waukegan, Illinois, which was still a fairly urban environment. My dad was an associate pastor in a large downtown church. One of the things that was interesting at that point in my life was that we were directly behind the central fire station. So I kind of got to know a lot of the firefighters. And as a fifth, sixth, and seventh grader, I used to hang out at the fire station all the time. And the fire prevention officer used to take me with him when he would make presentations, and he would let me help carry the stuff for him that he would take into the presentation in order to do that. And I can remember just many, many, many times being at the fire station. And I was actually there. There was a large Johns Manville plant that sat on a peninsula out in Lake Michigan, and they made roofing material at that plant. And that plant caught on fire that lasted for several days. And I can remember those firefighters coming back, and they would be literally covered in cooled off asphalt, and they couldn't hardly get out of their gear because as it cooled, it would get heavy and less pliable. And I'll never forget those poor guys, what they went through during that fire. But just as a middle schooler, and I was kind of a terror. I was.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, I wasn't in bad trouble, but I was always in trouble. And one of the things that I remember when I was in Waukegan, those big, gallon pickle jars, and I got one of those pickle jars, and I punched some holes in the top of it, and I went down to this park, and I literally stuffed that thing with grasshoppers. And I stuffed it with grasshoppers, and I brought it to school for show and tell at school because I wanted everybody to see my grasshoppers. And we had a substitute teacher that day, and it was just after lunch, and one of my little grasshoppers had managed to get squeezed through one of those little holes at the top and decided to fly across the room. So I jumped up, and I'm chasing this grasshopper around this room while she's trying to teach and wanting to get it and put it back in the jar. And she scolded me and said, "You don't seem to understand, Michael. I would rather have all those grasshoppers out in no commotion than one grasshopper out in a lot of commotion." Well, that was not the right thing to say to me at the time, because I went over and I opened that jar and I hit the bottom of it, and those grasshoppers dropped out on that counter. And it took them just a few seconds or a minute maybe to get themselves oriented. And then they lifted and flew across that classroom. Well, in all different directions. Oh,
my goodness.
So that cost me a week. I think I was suspended for a week because they had to clean out the classroom and the custodians had to come in and try to round up the grasshoppers. I was a preacher's kid, typical preacher's kid, and kind of the terror of the class. And Waukegan was famous because Jack Benny, the famous comedian, was from Waukegan. And so everybody who was in middle school in Waukegan had to play a string instrument. It was a requirement that you either played the cello or the violin or the bass, but everybody played a string instrument. And I guess that they were determined that they were going to discover the next Jack Benny. And I played the cello. Okay. So I had to drag this cello back and forth between my house and school. Man. And but I played the cello in school, and when I entered seventh grade, we moved from Waukegan, Illinois to Fairview Heights, Illinois, which is just outside of St. Louis, across the river from St. Louis. And while in Fairview Heights, I finished my junior high school years and then went to high school in an adjoining community called Belleville, Illinois, and went to high school there. And while in high school, I met my current wife. And
your only wife.
My only wife. Right, current and only wife. Good, Dave. Diana and I started dating as freshmen.
Freshman in high school?
Freshman in high school, yeah. So we dated off and on. And now we've been married in this coming June. We will be celebrating our 56th wedding anniversary. So we've been together a long, long time.
56 years.
56 years of
wedded
marriage.
Bliss, as they say, right?
And people ask me, they say, "What's your secret, Mike, to this long marriage that you've had?" And I said, "Oh, that's simple." I said, "I can tell you exactly what my secret is." I said, "My wife left me on a very, very regular basis, but she always came back." And that truly is the secret to my long marriage, because Diana became a Delta flight attendant, and she would go off for 3 or 4 days at a time on her trips. And I was always glad to see her leave, and I was always glad to see her come home. And it gave both of us a chance to kind of have a break.
Yeah.
And so that worked out real well.
How long was she a flight attendant for?
Well, she didn't start until our children were basically grown. But she worked for Delta for 18 years, and she started working for Delta in 1996. So our children, of which there were 3, there were 2 boys and a girl. She had done a very good job of raising them, because I was out working hard trying to make a living for us.
Yeah.
And so I give her the credit for being really a great mom. And moved with them several times, but we lived in Belleville from the day that I got there when I was in 7th grade until I was 32 years old. And so our young adult years were in Fairview Heights, Illinois. And when we had our children, I spent a number of years in the financial service business there. I entered the financial service business.
In Belleville?
Yeah, in Belleville. I entered the financial service business in 1972, primarily initially in the life insurance business. Then during those early years, I worked with the Illinois New Car and Truck Dealer Association, so I traveled a lot and traveled around the state and did planning basically for new car dealers. And I used our association endorsement as my way of getting in and introducing them to our services, our planning services. And so I was on the road a lot. But we were in that capacity for about 5 years. And then I became the regional manager for the Hartford Life. Okay. And I ran their office out of St. Louis. And I spent 4 years with the Hartford. And then Diana and I moved to Chicago, and I joined CNA Insurance Company's home office staff, reporting to their senior life insurance officer as the director of business development for CNA Insurance Company.
So you were how old at that point?
So 32.
Oh, so you were young.
Yeah,
you were young.
I was young. And the fact is, it was kind of fascinating because my offices were right downtown, literally on Michigan at Jackson. And my office, which was on the 40th floor of CNA Insurance Company, looked out over a Buckingham Fountain and the sailboat basin in downtown Chicago. And I mean, a lot of people said, you really had it made. Yeah. And in a sense, I did have it made, except I hated Chicago. I didn't like being in the home office. I didn't like the environment. I was constantly on the road. I was traveling all over the United States. Every single week it seemed that I was out for some kind of trip, literally from San Francisco to Boston. And I remember that I was in San Francisco on business, and it was the Tuesday night before Thanksgiving that week. And the CEO of the company called me, and he said there was somebody who worked for us in Boston who had quit, and he didn't want to lose this person because he was a top producer for us. And he said, I need you to get on a plane and go to Boston and sit down with him and try to convince him to stay with us because I don't want to lose him. And he said, I want you there tomorrow. And I remember saying to the CEO on the phone, sir, it is tomorrow in Boston right now, And so I flew from San Francisco to Boston on the red eye and got in the next morning and had been up all night, literally flying across the country to get to Boston. And I walked into this guy's office, and when I walked into his office, he looked up at me and he said, Mike, do not start. He said, my mind is made up. I know why you're here. And he said, just do not start. And I said, okay, Bill. And that was the extent of our conversation because he really was not interested in.
Oh, so you weren't able to convince him to stay?
No, he was gone. And he just, and I knew he was gone. And I knew him well enough that I knew that he meant what he was saying to me. And we did sit there for a little while and talk about some other things, but he wasn't interested in staying.
So did you go to school for what you ended up doing?
No, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I entered college, and I went to Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, the Edwardsville campus, which is located just outside the St. Louis area. And I only completed 2 years of college. That was all I completed. And I went in the insurance business. Diana and I had been together a long time at that point. So we got married when we were both 19, and a year later we had our first child. We had Sean, and I always thought it was kind of interesting. I felt like we were babies raising babies. I mean, because we were both really young,
20s,
and we you know, we were both 20 years old, and we had this little boy, and it turned out great, but it was tough. We just didn't have anything at all. And my father had left the ministry, and he joined an insurance company called National Life of Vermont, and he recruited me to work with him. And that's how I got in the insurance business. And it was really a freak situation that I ended up with this endorsement for the Car Dealer Association. I walked into a car dealer one time and started talking to him, and I came to the realization that he was the current president of the new Car Dealer Association for the state. And he was impressed with the presentation I made. And he said, I'd like to take you, and if you want to bring your dad, the two of you, and go up and meet with the executive director in Springfield of the Car Dealer Association. So we did that, and we walked out of there with the endorsement for estate planning. And the next few years, my entire existence was evolved around traveling and working with car dealers.
So how were you able to land that position with CNA at such a young age? Do you remember the interview process and what that was like?
I do. As a young man, I really thought I'd like to be an insurance executive. I want to be in somebody's home office. And I pushed pretty hard when I was with Hartford to try to get promoted to move up the line towards being in the home office with Hartford. They had decided that year to appoint me in a regional position in Atlanta. And I was in Atlanta, and I was looking for housing in Atlanta to be transferred there. And I got a phone call from my office, and they said, there's this guy trying to get hold of you. And I don't know who he is, but he's trying to get hold of you, and he really wants to talk to you bad today. So this is pre-cell phone days. So I called Chicago and talked to this guy, and he was the chief life insurance officer for CNA. And he said, what are you doing? I told him, and he said, well, you're doing the right thing, but you're in the wrong place. If you can, I want to see you in Chicago later this week, and I want to talk to you about working as a senior person for us in the home office of CNA. And the reason that I want to talk to you is because I understand that your office is one of the leading offices in the country in selling a product called Universal Life. And at that time, there were only 2 or 3 companies in the United States that were offering Universal Life. And CNA was developing a product that they wanted to introduce to their field. So since I had the experience of doing it, and I was in a management position, and I was young and affordable, they wanted to hire me to actually come in and to go across the country and to teach people how to sell that product and how to market it. And
Of course.
I just didn't like Chicago. I thought it was too big. It wasn't St. Louis. Everything seemed to be a major deal. On the days that I was in the home office, I was living out in a suburb called Naperville. And on the days I was in the home office, it was an hour commute in and it was an hour commute back. And on the days that I wasn't there, I was off to O'Hare and fighting, getting in and out of O'Hare. And it was just kind of a challenging time. In 1984, I went in and sat down with my boss, and I said, I'd like to move to Florida. And he said, what? And I said, I would really like to move to Florida. And he said, why would you want to do that? He said, do you realize that if you stay where you're at, doing what you're doing in a matter of a few years, you could have my job? And I realized that, and I didn't want his job. I mean, I didn't enjoy the pressures of the home office. He said, I think you'll be making a major step back if you go to Florida. And I said, okay. I said, I understand that, but I said, this is just not for me. And by then, I'd been there for a couple of years. We'd introduced the product. It was integrated into the marketplace with us, and they agreed to transfer me to Orlando, and I moved to here in March of 1984.
With CNA, was it a different title? Or
I came in as the regional life manager for Central and North Florida. And so I did that from 1984 to 1987. And in 1987, I made the decision to leave a company and go independent. And so
start your own.
I started my own agency. It evolved into a financial planning practice because by then I was a chartered life underwriter and a chartered financial consultant. And so I had a couple of professional designations. I was well seasoned in the business. I'd been at it for a number of years and had continued to do a lot of estate planning for business people. So after those 3 years, I thought, I'll just hang a shingle and start my own shop.
When did you come to that realization? How soon did you're like, all right, I need to leave and I need to open up my own thing. I've developed enough skills and knowledge here where I can just go and start my own thing.
A friend of mine visited me from Kansas City, and he said something to me that really just stuck with me. He said, "You'll never know what it's like to be free of your pressures until you let go and do it yourself." He said, when you're working for somebody else, just remember this, that your value is greater than you're getting back because they need that margin for themselves to sustain what they're doing. So I kept thinking about that, and I thought, I really don't need to be associated with a carrier. I have the skills to run my own shop if I choose to run my own shop, and because I'm running their shop. And so that was kind of the motivation for me to do that. During the early years of running my own shop, one of the things I did was that I got with several families, high net worth families in Florida, and started working in philanthropy.
Okay.
And I actually attended in Indianapolis a school on philanthropy that was put together by a private organization. And I got to be pretty good at it. I got to be pretty good at advanced philanthropic planning. And so as a result of that, I had gotten the endorsement from a different trade association. This one was called the Volunteer Hospitals of America of Florida. So at that time, Orlando Regional Hospital was the local VHA hospital in Orlando. But Halifax and Daytona and all across the state were these VHA hospitals. And so I would attend the VHA CEO conference in the Keys each year, and I would talk to the CEOs of the hospitals about advanced philanthropic planning and just try to help them understand what they need to be looking for from their foundations at their individual hospitals in this area. So in 1991, I was making that presentation in Key West at a hotel, and a CEO came up to me and he said, "Mike, have you ever considered becoming the CEO of a hospital foundation?" And I thought, well, no, not really. And I said, I really don't know anything about hospitals. I said, I know about philanthropy, but I don't know anything about
life
hospitals.
Insurance.
And he said, you know what I need our CEO and our foundation to know. And he said, I don't care that you don't know anything about hospitals. He said, I want to be able to have somebody in that position who's capable of doing what you do. And my family and I moved to Venice, Florida, and I became the CEO of the Venice Hospital Foundation.
So what happened to the life insurance agency at that point?
Business that I had was people who worked with me took over that business.
Were you still an owner of that insurance company, or you just cut ties completely?
I cut ties completely, and the people that had that agency paid me off on a portion of it. But remember, my contracts were contracts that, just like your contracts with insurance companies, where I had contracts that had been in my name, so I had residual income, which would flow in through my renewal accounts.
Got
and
it.
My renewal accounts continued to pay me.
Oh, so even though you had cut ties with the agency, you were still getting your residual income.
I was still getting my residual income from my business under contract.
So you really had nothing to really lose by taking on that venture.
The only thing that I lost was that I had to transfer the relationships that I had with people that were customers of mine that I had to transfer to other people in my agency so that they could continue to work with them.
Oh, but you still kept collecting
But
renewals on.
I still had my residual income.
So what was that split like? Did you make a deal with them of like if you're getting them new products or anything like that, you still get a cut or no?
Nope. I kept my residual income. I basically said, because of the fact that I'm changing careers, I'm willing to transfer this to you and these relationships. And I went out and saw those people and talked to them and said, okay, this is what's going to happen. And I'm about to become the CEO of a hospital foundation. And so it worked. And I was at the hospital and I thought, this is great. Venice, Florida is a nice little retirement community. I'll be here for 20 years or so, 15 or 20 years, and I'm going to retire here, and I'll run the hospital foundation. And I really enjoyed it, and it was something new and different.
Yeah.
But something happened that was rather amazing. So now it was about 3 years in 1995. I walked into the CEO's office one day, and he said, Mike, how are you coming on so-and-so campaign? And I said, oh, we're doing great, Jack. And he said, I want you to back off a little bit. And I thought, that's crazy. And I said, Jack, when the CEO of the hospital asked the CEO of the foundation to back off and quit raising money, something's going on. And I said, do you want to tell me about it? And he said, I got a call last week from a guy by the name of Rick Scott. And it's the same Rick Scott that you know, who's now our senator, who was then the head of Hospital Corporation of America. And he said, Rick Scott just offered us $150 million to buy this hospital. And he said, we're a community hospital. And HCA, which is the company that Rick Scott was the CEO of, he said, HCA is not somebody who I'm particularly interested in selling our hospital to because they're a proprietary system. And I don't think it is in this community's best interest for this to become a proprietary hospital. He said, but I'm fascinated by the fact that they would offer us $150 million for it because we're only making $6 or $8 million a year, and that's a lot of revenue.
Big gap.
Big gap. And so he said, I'm opening up a study to see who else out there might be interested in our hospital. And so he said, what I want you to do is I want you to go out and look around the country and figure out what we would do if we got the proceeds of the sale, and it was, say, somewhere between 125 and $150 million, and how we would use that in this community. And the decision was made that we would take the proceeds of the sale if we sold it, and we would create a new community foundation. The decision was made to sell the hospital to the Sisters of Bon Secours. And the Sisters of Bon Secours is the healthcare system that's in the Roman Catholic Church that is based out of Baltimore area. And the CEO of the Sisters of Bon Secours walked into my office one day, and he said, Michael, I'm here to congratulate you. He said, you are the new Senior Vice President of Philanthropic Services for the Bon Secours healthcare system. And I said, well, that's great. And he said, and you will be working directly with me in our home office in Baltimore, Maryland.
Oh.
And that was exactly my reaction, Dave. I didn't say that to him, but internally I went, oh, no, I'm not, because I was not prepared to go back up north and to go back to work for a company. And so they made it very clear to me over the next month or so that because of my income, that they were not going to keep somebody at my income level in Southeast Florida or Southwest Florida. That if I didn't want to join them in the home office, that they did not have a job for me. And so I was okay with that, because I came back to Orlando and rejoined the agency. Okay.
So you already had the exit plan
I thought,
made out.
well, that's what's happened. This is where I was before.
Correct.
This is what I'll do now. And I just came back to Orlando and I rejoined the agency.
Man.
And so by that point in time, the agency was going and doing fine. I rejoined basically in the capacity I was in before. I was there from 96 until maybe 2005. Okay.
So you were there for quite a
just
bit.
worked my book of business and
Yeah.
worked with the people that were in the agency. So it got to a point to where it was Mike and a couple of administrative people. And I'm thinking, I don't really need this office, these administrative people and all this overhead at this point in my life. And so I basically moved my operation into my house. I was beginning to do a lot more investment work than I was planning. So I became associated with a registered investment advisor, and I had had my licenses for years, since 1972. I'd been licensed.
Did you have to get any other license to make that transition?
Believe it or not, I don't know how familiar you are with the financial licenses of the NASD, National Association of Security Dealers, but I was what was called a Series 1. And today, if you go into a bank or any financial institution, they're either going to be a Series 7, which is
Series
considered
7,
a
yeah.
comprehensive license, or Series 6, which is the intermediate step. Back in 1972, when I got licensed, there was no Series 6 or Series 7. There was only one series, and they called that Series 1. So I had been a Series 1 back in 1972. So I had a premier license, but I hadn't really done that kind of work.
So you were like grandfathered in
I was like grandfathered.
to, you know, all the other
I was not only
licenses.
like grandfathered in,
You were.
I was grandfathered in. So I was grandfathered in under that license.
When did that stop though? When did the Series 7, or I'm sorry, the Series 1, when did that go null and void, and then now the 6 and the 7?
They just made us 7s, even though I was a Series 1. Since they didn't have Series 1 anymore and we were like becoming obsolete. I don't remember exactly what time that happened, but they just made us 7s because the Series 1 was the equivalent of a 7.
Yeah, because I don't know if I've told you, but I sat for the Series 7 right before I got into the Medicare industry.
Yeah.
And I bombed the test. But
Oh, you did?
yeah, it was, and then you have to get sponsored. So it's a process. It's not It's not just as simple as the
It
the
was a lot
insurance license.
simpler back in 1972.
I would
and
imagine.
It was a lot easier too.
I would imagine. So a lot of the guys that I was working alongside with, they had Series 7, Series 63, Series 62, Series 65, and they would have you said chartered underwriting. So they would have all these initials.
Consultants or CFP.
Yes.
Chartered financial planner.
Yes. So they would have all these initials next to their name.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait. So you mean to tell me my Series 7 is like a stepping stone? And they're like, well, no, you can do a lot of things with the Series 7, but the idea is to get a bunch of initials after your name.
Right. Yeah.
And then once I, bombed the test, I was like, all right, my career in financial advising is over quickly because it was too much legwork.
Yeah. Well, I had become a chartered advisor in philanthropy back when I had first opened my agency, when I was going during the first go round. So I had that series of initials that people looked for when it came to financial advisors. And I've considered myself to primarily be an insurance person. And I might as well do some rather traditional planning for families in investment management. So I became associated with a registered investment advisory firm. We would go in and I would open the accounts and sell the accounts, and he would take responsibility with his staff for administering that business. I built a healthy book of investment business along with the insurance business book that I had. So I had a decent amount of residual income that was coming from that.
Was it easy for you to transition to the investment side because you've already had established book of life and then you just cross-sold those folks? Or was it I would assume you didn't start from scratch.
No, oh no, yeah. Some of it was folks that I would cross-sell. I didn't change my process significantly because what I did was I continued to do estate planning, but I would add to the back end of it once I had done the planning and all the work that needed to be done for high net worth families. I would add to the back end of it the investment side of it. And now let me take you back.
Taking a quick break from the podcast to show a little love to our sponsor, National Risk Advisors. If you're a small business, you need to be covered. You need to protect everything you work for and make sure you have a proper policy in place to safeguard you against any type of liability. Call my guys over at National Risk Advisors. They can help you get a free quote line you up with a business policy that's tailored to fit your needs. So what are you waiting for? Hit up National Risk Advisors. Tell them David from Blueprint sent you. Now back to the podcast.
I've now closed my agency, working from my home. It's me. I don't have all that overhead anymore. And I'm still out there doing planning, but I'm a little bit of a lone wolf. I had gone to a workshop that was put on by a lawyer who was basically from Orlando here, and he didn't his practice was basically to train lawyers around the country in a process of planning that was somewhat at that time unconventional. And what was unconventional about it was that typically when law firms in those days did estate planning, they would say to the mom and dad, look, you don't want to involve your kids in this, because if you involve your kids in this is really going to get messy and it just doesn't work real well. This is your money. You've earned it. You're the people who have built this estate, and you need to be the ones to settle it, and we can help you do that, and we can give you the documents and everything that you need to do that. But let's don't make this messy. And that was the paradigm in those days. That was what they believed was the right thing to do. This lawyer, Scott Farnsworth, he didn't believe that. He believed that you really needed to involve the family, and that process should become a whole family process. And therefore, he promoted working very closely with the entire family, and to do that through a series of family meetings, and to involve the children and involve the family. One of the big problems with very high net worth families and high net worth people is that the children, because their parents are outstanding people, because they've made a lot of money, the children have some identity issues and have some feelings of inferiority. So the person that needs to be part of that process is really a therapist. So Scott and I decided that we would work with high net worth families, and we would add a therapist to our team. And the therapist that we added was a lady by the name of Mary Tomlinson. So Mary joined us, and the three of us decided that we would work with these high net worth families. Now, I'm in the mid 1990s at this point, and we decided we're at a point in our careers where we've done a number of things. We're definitely at this point mature, and we really don't want to be doing crazy stuff like traveling all over the country. So we'll just work with high net worth families in Florida. And it was my job, because I was comfortable doing this, to go out and open these opportunities and to find these people. And it was their job to be part of this team with me as we would go in and work with the families. So we're just going to work with families in Florida. And the first family that we worked with was from Florida, a very high net worth family here in Florida. And they referred us to somebody, believe it or not, in all places in Southern California. Okay, so now we've got this opportunity to go work with this family out of Southern California who happens to have a Florida business. And so we chose to go ahead and do that, even though it was not what we had planned on doing.
So you traveled to Southern California?
So we traveled to Southern California to meet with his family and to start the process of working with them and to do what needed to be done for them. And just one led to another. And after we worked, we ended up working with a family in Chicago. We ended up working with a family in Connecticut. We ended up working with somebody from Oklahoma, and he was in the oil business. And then we started getting into these different relationships with oil people in Oklahoma. So he referred us to other local oil people.
The not traveling concept kind of went out the window.
So the not traveling concept, we blew it to hell.
So how did you come across, I know you said you were the point guy in finding these individuals. Yeah. Back in 2005, there was not a lot of social media. I think MySpace might have been a thing. So how were you able to find, because I mean, right now I can go on Instagram and find somebody.
Right. It was all by referral.
Even the initial one?
The initial family was an O-line insurance family that I had served years ago. The initial family out of West Florida. Okay.
So it all tied back to.
But it would just go. It was amazing how it would work. I mean, the person that got us into the oil families in California, or I mean in California, in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, happened to attend one of Scott's workshops. Scott did workshops for lawyers from all around the country that would come into Orlando and attend his workshops. We were referred into this family by their lawyer that had been their lawyer for many years, and he referred us into this oil family. I always introduced our services the exact same way. Okay, I told this story, which is not my story. It's not an original story. I read it in a book, but it's a great story about a friend that went out and bought himself a very, very expensive sports car. And he loved driving that sports car. And what he really loved driving it was taking it to the mountains. And he would be in the mountains with his sports car, and he would be running those mountain roads and those curves. And one Sunday afternoon, he's out there and he's flying through the mountains, and he's running his car as fast as he can through the curves. And he enters a curve, and a woman's coming at him from the other direction and almost hits him. And as she flashes by him, she's got her window down, and he's got his top down, and she yells, "Pig!" And he looked back at her and he yelled, "Idiot!" And as he entered that curve, he hit the big pig that was standing right there in the middle of the road. Okay. And that's the old paradigm. Because what happens if you try to do this by yourself and you don't include your kids? The big pig that's standing in the middle of the road is that you haven't started the process to prepare them to deal with in the next generation what you've been dealing with for years. And you've got a responsibility, if you want to continue this transfer of wealth successfully into the next generation, to be able to prepare those generations to be able to deal with this. And you've also got a responsibility to help build up their self-esteem so that they're in a position to be able to do these things successfully.
And so you had a lot of success with that story, I would assume.
That always made sense to them.
Well, I mean, it does, because how do you, like, for example, with my kids, I hope to build something and have a legacy at the end. So it's difficult for me to give them my drive, because my upbringing, me and my wife's upbringing, is totally, totally different than what their upbringing is. So their reality at the ages that they are now is nowhere near what my wife and I's reality was growing up in me in New Jersey and her in New York.
Right.
So I always try to tell her, we have to find a way to put him through something and teach him something, but also teach him how to maintain what we're trying to build. So that's very valuable information. How did you do that for your kids?
We haven't talked about my family much.
Yeah.
Let me wrap up my business career by saying this. In 2016, I made the decision to retire. And financially, I was in a position to be able to make that decision. My wife, who had been with the Delta Airlines for 18 years at this point, was also ready to retire. And Diana and I said, let's retire and let's take advantage of our flight privileges that we have since you've been with Delta. And we set out to go to all 7 continents. And we really originally didn't set out to go to 7 continents. But we started traveling around the world to different places and exciting places. And we had just had a ball. That's the awesome. Next 8 or 10 years, and did a lot of traveling. And we did go to all 7 continents and had a great time.
That's a dream.
So it was fun. That's amazing. And we had 3 children that I think are very remarkable children. Our oldest son, which you remember, we had one when we were basically babies, because our oldest son has been with Nike for over 25 years. And he is now the director of children's footwear for Nike shoes out of in their home office in Beaverton, Oregon. And so his team works with the various distribution people around the country and with the distribution people from their various vendors to bring to market all children's footwear. So Nike's a remarkably big company.
Oh yeah, massive.
And if I remember right, I think they sell $58 billion of footwear a year.
That's probably right.
And about $30 billion of soft
clothing, yeah.
In addition to their footwear, which is their biggest business.
Goodness.
But anyway, and he had started with Nike Golf and was with Nike Golf until Nike went out of the golf business and then transferred to footwear. And Sean's a remarkable guy, and he has been very successful. Our middle son, who lives in Greensboro, North Carolina, is fleets of vehicles, a fleet management person. And he markets fleets of vehicles to major companies across America. So he goes in and does the leasing, which is what all of the companies do, leasing of fleets of vehicles. And, he deals with major companies on the road all the time, deals with major companies across America in structuring these vehicle leases. And it doesn't matter where he lives. He's in charge of the eastern half of the United States for them. And they've got somebody else who does the western half of the United States. But he's the VP of marketing for a company called Wheels. Good name for a fleet vehicle company. And our daughter, who did her undergrad at Wake Forest, and by the way, our middle son is a big Tar Heel, and his sons are Tar Heels, and so that's a big Tar Heel family. But our daughter is a Demon Deacon, and she came out of school. She was a very successful dancer. She danced for Disney for several years as a child and did a lot of TV specials for Disney and just did a lot of interesting things in dance and went to Wake Forest on a dance scholarship. Nice. Came out of Wake Forest and went to law school in Florida. And now she is an assistant United States attorney, which she's been for like a decade now here in Orlando.
Wow.
And so she's an AUSA. So the kids have done great. We have 5 beautiful grandchildren, and we have 2 little girls that are the children of my daughter and her husband that live here in a community that are ages 4 and 6. Mm-hmm. So we got some cute little grandies around us.
That's amazing.
And Diana spends the majority of her time playing with those little girls. It gets as much of an opportunity as she can to have them around her.
I bet.
So, that's kind of it. We're just good old-fashioned Central Floridians, and we love it here. We've always loved Orlando.
You've been here at this point, what, almost 30 years?
Yeah, 1984.
More than 30 years.
Yeah, we moved here in 84. And but when we originally moved to town, we lived up in Sable Point, up in Longwood. And my office was in Winter Park. And when I was running the CNA's regional office here.
So if you could go back in time, would you pick the same career path that you picked the way you had it, or would it change somehow, some way?
It kind of picked me. I mean, it was interesting. I took a train last week to South Florida, and coming back, the lady across from me on the train, my wife and I were on a train coming back from a cruise, and the lady across from us happened to be an independent agent. And we had talking about Hartford and CNA and independent agencies. And I had worked with independent agents for years. And as we talked with her about our experience, she said to me, nobody when they're young say, I want to go in the insurance business. She said, people just don't say, I want to go in the insurance business. She said, I think that people happen to get into the insurance business and they find that this is really a pretty decent way to make a living, and said, so you evolve into the insurance business. And I think that's true for an awful lot of people. And
myself included.
You just kind of, this is a good way to make a living, and it's not considered to be anything that's glamorous.
Not at all.
But it's a very good business. 22 years old with a 2-year-old child and very little income. I was young and ambitious, and I've always enjoyed selling and marketing, even though late in my career, when Scott, Mary, and I got together, we sold less than we just entered contracts with these families. I'd walk into their office and say, let me explain our company and how we work. And Mr. Smith here wants to continue to do business with you. And we're going to be in this planning process. And with his permission, we'll share this information with you. And we might even invite you to sit in on some of these sessions with us if you choose to do that. And some advisors would be kind of, No. I said, well, do you want me to go back to him and tell him that you don't want to do this? I don't have a problem in doing that.
Yeah.
But is that what you want me to do? No. And what would happen, they would, we made some really good friends from people who got some really good business as a result of the contract that we might have with a family that they were dealing with.
So how did that work? How did you get paid if they already had certain products lined up with other agents, other lawyers,
They contracted for our services. We would enter 6-figure contracts with these families to plan.
Whoa! So that you were their consultants?
Yeah.
Holy cannoli! What was? Are you able to disclose the biggest contract that you did? for,
Oh, most of our contracts were either like 6 months or a year.
but
Probably the biggest
monetarily?
contract that I did was maybe 150,000, but we'd do them in increments. We'd do like 6 months. We're going to do 3 retreats for your family in the next 6 months. The families are high net worth families, so they would absorb all of the expense of the retreat, and we would typically have the retreat at a location where the family was comfortable with coming into that location because they could do family things around the retreat that would make it worthwhile. So let's say that we did a retreat. We're going to do a retreat one weekend for your family in Orlando, Florida, and you're from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we're going to do this in Orlando, Florida, and we're going to do it 6 weeks from now. And we've got everything arranged for you at the hotel in a place called Celebration, okay? And so you'll come into Celebration. We have certain events already put together there at the hotel with us and with your family. And then in around that, you can go to Disney World and Universal and things like that. And you can put a little family vacation together around that with your kids and grandkids. And what we would do with the kids and grandkids, the reason Mary was so essential, is when Scott and I were with their kids that are adult kids, and sometimes these adult kids are 40 or 50 years old. Okay, because the patriarch and the matriarch are in their 70s or 80s. So we've got the adult kids together, and Mary would take the kids in the family, and she would work with them in some of the self-esteem exercises and some of the other things that we would do for that family, and helping them understand the uniqueness of their situation. And we would do some, I don't know if you're familiar with style training. With the fact that people have different kinds of social styles.
Oh yes, the driver, analytical,
The
amiable,
analyticals, the amiables,
and the expressives.
expressives.
Yes,
okay?
yes, yes.
That's style training. We did a lot of style training. Mary would do style training with the children and the grandchildren and with the younger adults to teach them that these people are not wrong. They're just different than you.
Of course.
People see things through different lenses. And so those lenses are somewhat determined by what social style you are. And I used to have an expression that I would use when I would introduce to families. I would say every family that we've ever worked with has a DDO.
Designated, I don't know what the 2D stand for.
It's a designated difficult one. Okay? It's the DDO. I've never, ever worked with a family where there's not a DDO. Now, let me tell you something about DDOs, okay? They're not wrong.
They see things from a different lens. Like
They're
you mentioned.
different.
Yeah.
Okay. And I've never seen a family that didn't have a DDO. I've seen families where there's more than one DDO, depending upon a family. But generally there's one.
Yeah.
Okay. And so these are things that the old paradigm didn't deal with at all. The old paradigm said, we'll take care of these documents and we'll take care of this funding and we'll take care of that. But just do this because you don't want all that mess. Okay. Now, I will say today, planning organizations have somewhat evolved.
How you were able to navigate that? Because I mean, that's a very niche type of a client. What was some traits, some characteristics, some habits that you saw in that type of a person? You know, somebody who's very, very wealthy versus regular Joe Schmo. Did anything stand out?
Yeah. The majority of people that are wealthy are very unique people, and they're very special people. I mean, and that's something that their children learn very early on, and they really have a tough time dealing with how do I fit with this person who's this big.
So what you found was that their children's perspective was that like they were trying to figure out how they fit in and how they compared.
How do they? I mean, you know, if your mom or your dad achieves this level of success and does these kinds of things, how do you deal with that? And I mean, this is not a client of mine, and I'll just give you a general comparison in the community, okay? A very well-known person here is David Siegel in this town. Westgate's an incredibly successful company, okay? And what happened to his 16-year-old daughter?
Yes.
Not unusual.
Yes.
Not unusual. If you ever watch the movie The Queen of Versailles,
Oh, I did.
okay, and you watch that fiasco with her at the McDonald's, that is the kinds of things that are not unusual in these families.
And it was just because it was a taboo conversation.
They were working under a different paradigm. They were working under a totally different paradigm. But the paradigm that we're under was let's get in, let's do our stuff, let's make our money, let's get our insurance policies, our legal documents, our investments in place, and get out.
Yeah, that structure that you built, that's genius. You have you're the sales guy, you're the marketing guy, you got the lawyer for all the red tape or whatever you call it, and you got the therapist to talk through that situation and figure out, get to the root cause of what or why.
And we could have gone on, except I was just I had reached a point to where I was north of 65. I was tired, okay? I had always had the responsibility for going out and working with the referrals or digging them out. I did enjoy doing it, but I just felt like, Diana's about to retire. I'm ready to go traveling. There's some things I'd really like to do to go have some fun.
So did they buy you out? How did that process work?
No, we didn't really have to buy each other out because we'd always put our money in and then split up whatever we were dealing with. And there wasn't really any of a buyout process. Scott would say, if he was sitting here in this room right now, he'd say, I want you to meet Mike Cummings, one of the most generous people I've ever met in my life. I mean, 1972 to 2016 is a while.
That's quite a while.
It was, I consider it to be a run that I'm very proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's quite the run.
And we met some really neat people.
Bet. I'm sure.
Met some really neat people.
Was there a number that you needed to hit that you were, okay, I'm ready for retirement?
You mean like a financial number?
A financial number.
There was a time number.
It was.
and Scott and Mary fully understood my feelings.
Yeah. What advice would you give a younger family, myself or somebody who's younger, of things to put in place to try to create that generational wealth?
Well, I don't know if I have any incredibly pertinent advice that I could give when it comes to wealth creation. I would say that the advice that I would give as far as wealth preservation, would be, don't worry about doing it right. Because no matter what you do, nobody has ever written a very good book on doing it right. And I'm talking about parenting, okay? Because I'm not sure that there's a right way to parent. But I can tell you this, you need to have a wholly inclusive process. You need for your family to communicate and to hang together and to go at tasks together and to go at challenges together. And because if you don't do that, you won't prepare them for when that time comes. My kids have said to me, Dad, how do you know that? And I say, I know that because I did it that way 25 years ago.
Yes.
And I said, shit, I wish I'd done it this way.
Yes. You already know the path. You've been down that path.
I've been down that path.
Exactly. So now you're just kind of reliving it through your kids, grandkids.
Like, you just come up with an answer like that. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Same thing with my father, and I'm doing that with my son now.
And you go through those processes, and it's kind of funny because you'll sit back or I'll sit back and a 2-year-old or 25-year-old ask you a question, and you almost giggle to yourself because I know this one.
Allow me.
Yeah, I can tell you this one. And that's called wisdom.
Yes.
And we had a client whose home was in an office building. And the office building on the lower floors were Merrill Lynch offices. Okay. And you get on the elevator and it would be, say, like 18, would be the top floor. And you would take a credit card and you would hold it to the numbers above the number on the elevator, and 2 more numbers would light up.
Oh.
And the top 2 floors of that office building were their home.
Wow.
Okay. And the way you get in and out of the home was either call in and have them
buzz you up,
or they would get in the elevator and hold their card to the wall, and these 2 numbers would appear, and they had the penthouse of that office building as their home. And they had a second home that was a compound. Okay. And it was a compound of buildings around a pool area. And I may be wrong, but it was something like the compound had something like 48 bedrooms. Okay. Several of the bedrooms were like a wall panel where you would push on the wall panel and there would be like a secret bedroom. And they were oil people.
Man.
But they lived a fascinating life. And they drove Toyota Camrys. I just thought it was funny that they drove Toyota Camrys.
Wow.
I mean, they were really rich people, and they drove Toyota Camrys.
Wow. That brings to my next question, actually. I wanted to ask you, with all the success you had, with your corporate positions with CNA and with the Hartford that you mentioned, starting your own practice, leaving that, doing the hospital thing, and then proceeding to finding the family planning business. What was the best purchase that you ever made during your career and the worst purchase that you ever made?
Worst purchase and best purchase. I can't tell you that. I can tell you the best decision.
Okay.
The best decision I made was to leave Chicago, Illinois, and to come to Orlando, Florida, and to take my giant step back. Okay, that was the best decision I ever made in my career. And I don't have any doubt about that. And probably the worst decision I ever made in my career, when I first left CNA and decided to set up my own agency, I had an offer from a guy in St. Petersburg. And the guy in St. Petersburg said, if you're going to set up your own agency, come over here and join our big property casualty agency. Set up a life department, and you can own the life department and operate the life department for us and build this with our property casualty agency here. And I went over there, and I spent 18 months in St. Petersburg, and he kept saying to me, just as soon as you guys get relocated over here, we'll finalize all the aspects of our agreement between us and the agency. But, you really need to be over here on a permanent basis. And I kept saying to him, just as soon as we finalize our agreement on the agency, then I'll move my family over here. Yeah. And he and I played that game for almost 18 months.
Wow.
Okay. And after 18 months, it became very apparent to him and very apparent to me that we were not going to come together on that, because he wanted more control than I wanted him to have, and I wanted more control than he wanted to have. And I didn't need him anyway, and he didn't really need me. He had a very successful large property casualty agency. And so that was probably the worst. But it was an interesting time, and there were a couple of good contacts that came from that period of time for me.
Leave us with a couple of things. One thing, what advice would you give someone that's 18, 19, has a kid, doesn't know what direction that they want to go in?
I would say what I hear repeated all the time by people, okay? Find out what you love and do everything you can to pursue that. And don't let anything stand in your way if that's really what you want to do or be. When it comes to giving advice, that's kind of the common theme that you hear repeat over and over again. And I believe that. I believe it very much.
Okay. That's valid advice. And now when the book closes on Mr. Mike Cummings.
It's not too far from closing. By the way, I am now in the fourth quarter.
In the fourth quarter?
Yeah, in the fourth quarter of the game, because I'm 76 years old. I'm a year into the fourth quarter of my game. All right. Now, I don't know if I'll complete this quarter or foul out somewhere along the line, which is very possible.
Oh, don't say that.
It is what it is.
But when that does occur, what do you want your legacy to be for your kids and for those 5, hopeful 6 grandbabies of yours?
I would think that Diana and I have been so closely tied together that my kids, when they look back, would say he was fun, he was exciting to be around, that mom and dad were a great team, and that they have every reason in the world to be proud of what creation came from their love. That would be my what I would want my principal legacy to be.
Is that for your kids or for your grandkids as well?
Yeah, my great grandchildren, wherever they are or might be at some point.
That's great, Mike. I want to thank you for taking the time.
Thanks. We did it twice.
I know. This is the second time's a charm, right?
Yeah.
I appreciate you. Thank you for being a loyal client, you and Miss Diana.
Oh, yeah. You do a great job.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Hopefully, this relationship lasts for a lot more years in your fourth quarter.
That's good. I hope so too.
Yes. So thanks again. And this has been another episode of Blueprints Podcast with Mr. Mike Cummings. So please like, share, subscribe, comment, do all that good stuff, and let us know what you thought. All right. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you.